If you love matcha, this is the cake for you. You're going to start by adding 3/4 cups of whole milk to a pot over medium-high heat just until it starts to simmer, and make sure not to let the milk boil. Once it starts to simmer, then add 7 teaspoons of matcha, and depending on the quality of your matcha, you can add more or less. And then once the matcha has dissolved, you can take it off the heat, and then you're just going to set it aside to cool for 20 minutes. And now, in a large bowl, I'm using a KitchenAid, you're going to add 2 cups of cake flour, 1¼ cups of white granulated sugar, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, half a teaspoon of salt, and then you're going to give that a quick stir to combine everything. And then once that's all combined, you can add in your butter. So I added the butter in 3 additions. Then you're just going to continue to mix this until it starts to become like a crumbly texture. And then in a separate bowl, we're going to prepare the wet ingredients. So you're going to crack 3 eggs plus an additional egg white. I use carton egg whites, just that's because what I had on hand, but of course you could separate an egg and use the yolk later. If you're using carton egg whites, 2 tablespoons is equal to 1 large egg white. Then you're just going to give your eggs a whisk and then add in the matcha milk and stir to combine. And then with the egg mixture, you're going to take half of that and pour that into the flour butter mixture and then mix that. Then you're going to add in the rest of it and then mix that up. It's gonna look a little curdled, but don't worry, that's totally normal. And then you're just gonna add in another half a cup of flour and then continue to mix that until it gets really smooth and fluffy. And now we're gonna prep our cake pans. So while we prep, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Here I'm using these Wilton 6-inch cake pans that are supposed to make layering cakes a little easier, but you can also use whatever pan sizes you have. These pans are pretty short, so I like to grease them with butter and coat them with a little bit of flour, but you can use parchment paper or cake release, whatever works the best for you. Once you've prepared the pans, divide the cake batter evenly. And this is a pretty thick batter, so I would smooth it out and then give it a couple taps just to get rid of those air bubbles. Then you're going to put the cakes into the oven and bake them for about 20 minutes, more or less, depending on the cake pans you used and as well as your oven. You can do a quick toothpick test to see if your cakes come out clean, and if they come out clean, you know your cakes are ready to come out of the oven. So just let them cool for about 10 to 15 minutes before you actually take the cakes out of the pan. Once you've let the cakes cool, use a spatula or a knife and run it around the edges of the cake just to loosen it. Don't make my mistake. I know I just told you to wait 10 to 15 minutes to let them cool. I did not do that, so don't do that. But then I flip the cake over onto a cooling rack and then I'll put the cake back into the pan. And the reason I do this is so I can level my cakes a lot easier. And what I'll do is I will use a knife and I lay it flat on top of the cake pans, and then I just use that to cut off the tops of the cake. And then you're just going to take off the cake tops and then you can eat them. They make for a really good snack. And I made my cakes the day before I decorated them, so make sure your cakes are completely cooled before you put them into a container, or if you even frost them the day of. And for me, I just put a layer of parchment paper to separate them, and this makes it easier for me to stack them later too. Now it's time for the frosting. So I decided to make a cream cheese whipped cream frosting. I wanted something really light and not too sweet. So you're going to start by creaming 1 cup or 8 ounces of cream cheese just until it's smooth. And then you're going to sift about 1/4 cup of icing sugar. The amount of icing sugar you add in depends on how sweet you want it. I think 1/4 cup leans more on the lesser sweet side, so add more if you want it sweet. You're going to just combine that, and then you're going to add in a teaspoon of vanilla extract. With my stand mixer, I put the bowl and the whisk into the fridge while I cream the cream cheese, just so that it would make it really cold, and this makes whipping the heavy cream easier and faster. So you're gonna whip 2 cups of heavy cream just until stiff peaks are formed, And then you can add in the cream cheese, and then you're just gonna whip that up until it's combined. You'll see that it's nice and fluffy, and you shouldn't see any more of the cream cheese lumps. And then what I did was I transferred 2/3 of the cream to another bowl, and the remainder of the cream I added a teaspoon of matcha, which I sifted just so it would be easier to combine. And then now it's time to assemble our cake. And now it's time for my favorite part. So we're gonna put the cake together, and what I did was I started off by adding a dollop of cream just onto the cake board, and this is just gonna make sure that the cakes don't move while we're frosting it. And then you're gonna put the cake onto the cake board, try to center it as best as possible, and then with another dollop of cream you're gonna put that on top, spread it out evenly, and this is just gonna create our layers between when we cut open the cake. I sifted a little bit of matcha on top and in between each of the layers, but I would skip that. It didn't help, wasn't necessary, but you learn from your mistakes. And then you're just gonna continue to do this for all of your layers. Now this is the fun part. So my camera ran out of space, I didn't realize that, but what you want to do beforehand is you're just going to crumb coat it with the white frosting, and basically exactly what I'm doing here for the final coat. But once you do the crumb coat, then you can do the final coat. And so I just put some cream on top, put it on the top half of the cake, and then the bottom half I'm just going to put the matcha green tea frosting there. And this is how we're going to create our gradient. So I went in with a smaller spatula, and I just put the cream on where I thought I needed it, a little more there, and kind of spread it out smoother. And then I took a bigger spatula and I just continuously ran it around the cake. Just kept spinning and spinning and spinning, and then eventually the gradient was kind of formed and you get nice smooth sides. And I'm also aware I made a mess on the cake board, but I just scraped that off and then cleaned it up later. I know there's other better ways to do it, but you do what works best for you. I sprinkled a little bit of matcha on the top of the cake for decoration purposes this time. And then I also took the white cream and then I put it into a piping bag, and I just made little marshmallow mountain shapes. I don't know what you call them, but yeah, I was trying to do the math here and then I was struggling and I totally miscalculated and I was one short, but I think it still works. So yeah. And then for the border at the bottom, I decided to do smaller little dots because I thought that would be really fun, and it kind of helps clean up the mess that I made. And that's it for this video. This is how I make my green tea matcha cake. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.